So recently, James Lindsay did a podcast with Jordan Peterson, and I watched about 2/3 of it. I just haven't had time to watch the rest of it. And it's not terribly impressive, and I can see why people have just taken to mocking this. However, people are definitely underestimating what James Lindsay is attempting to do here, because people think that he's stupid. However, James Lindsay is not stupid. He is just in the unenviable position of desperately playing a rearguard action in defense of liberalism, and this leads him into ridiculous positions in which he is forced to do things that are essentially kind of deceptive. Because I actually think that the standout clip from this is James Lindsay trying to manipulate Jordan Peterson and the conservative Christian movement in the United States. There's no secret that James Lindsay is deeply against Christian nationalism because he sees it as being an anti-liberal movement, and of course he wants liberalism. And so he has struck on a tactic here, and this is what this is. It is a stratagem that he is trying to use in order to prevent the rise of what he calls the woke right. And he's been anything but shy about saying all of this. And there's a kind of way of pathologizing the woke right, which I actually really dislike. It might well be true, but the problem with sort of psychologizing and psychoanalyzing the people who join a thing is it doesn't strike at the actual root of the issue. Because often people will glom on to something that has a point, but the reason that they're attracted to it is because of intellectual, emotional character defaults of their own. But it doesn't actually refute the point. And if you're not actually refuting the point, and you can't say why it's wrong, well, why should we not think that it's right? And that's the problem that James has with the woke right. And in fact, that's the problem that liberals generally have with collective movements and collectivism in its entirety. There is an aspect of the human condition that believes in collectivism and recognizes it when it sees it and responds to it in kind. And the liberal, being the abstracted tradition of the English people, doesn't understand that his own individualism is a form of Anglo-collectivism. It is what the Anglos collectively believe and how they think the world should be structured. And to push that on to other cultures is itself a form of collectivism and a kind of cultural domination that we don't even see and we don't even understand. But other cultures recognize it as ours and see it as being particular to us. Anyway, so this is the particular clip in question.
So I want to talk about this Lucifer idea. So Lucifer is the morning star, and he's the angel of the untrammeled intellect. That's how he's portrayed in Milton, right? And he's allied in some strange way with the serpent in the Garden of Eden.
If I might just interject, if he's the morning star, what do you do in the morning after the morning star rises? You wake up.
Right.
Woke.
Right.
So this is broadly just quite embarrassing for anyone who is involved in these intellectual spheres. And I imagine that Peterson just let it go because it sounds kind of ridiculous. And James Lindsay also knows how ridiculous it is. But what he's doing here is trying to seed the idea that Lucifer was woke. And the thing is, he is right. Lucifer was the original liberal. And this is what Peterson is referring to when he calls him the sort of the fallen angel of the untrammeled intellect, or however it was he characterized him there. What he's saying is, if you are to apply only reason to anything, then you end up in a kind of Luciferian position, because what you're trying to do, at least as Milton describes him, because what you're trying to do is find a rational grounding for everything. And there are some things that are just not grounded in rationality. And it just happens to be that religion is generally not grounded in rationality. I'm not saying there aren't rational reasons to be religious, but primarily it is from a sentimental movement from within the heart. It's kind of ironic that James is like, well, Lucifer was the original OG woke person. He was the one who was woke. It's like, yes, because liberalism is itself a woke movement. because to be woke is to have a structural, systematic critique of power dynamics and relations and demand rational justification for them. I agree that Lucifer was woke, but so is liberalism itself. The very nature of what liberalism is a woke movement, and it was entirely predicated on critiquing the unjust power of the king. This irrational, historic, inherited power structure was what liberalism was critiquing, and the only difference between liberalism then and wokeism now is that liberalism is now the power structure that is being critiqued with its own tools. This is no different to what liberalism did with monarchy in the 18th century, and saying, well, look, I happen to like the bourgeois establishment that we have now. Okay, that's great, but there's absolutely nothing that stops the revolution once it's got going. And if you've got a tool that you use to take apart someone else, and that tool can be used to take apart you, well, I mean, I'm just saying I'm a little less sympathetic to that. Anyway, so yeah, James is well aware of what he's trying to do here. He's trying to suggest that being woke is being satanic, and being satanic is being woke right to make sure the Christians stay on the liberal plantation. They look over the fence and go, nope, that's where the Satanism is. When in fact, it is the woke liberals, the original woke liberals, who have them on their plantation from which they're not allowed to leave. And this is what James Lindsay is clumsily doing in this particular part of the interview. And you can say, well, look, I agree with him, and that's fine. You can agree with him. And you can say, look, I disagree with him, and that's fine. You can disagree with him. But the tactic is quite plain, at least to me. And I think that actually there's a much broader and deeper conversation to be had, rather than just, we need to maintain the integrity of liberalism, which again, I want to stress, was the original woke movement. It was obviously widely mocked by people online because it is ridiculous, but nobody was really giving an adequate explanation as to why this was so silly. Obviously, it's ridiculous, clownish. But James is prepared to take the slings and arrows as long as later on he can try and say, well, look, if you are woke right, you are Luciferian, even though the content of what the woke right want is the diametric opposite of what the woke left want, and the actual content of what they're trying to construct is actually more in line with Christian values, hence them calling themselves Christian nationalists, than the actual Luciferian values of the woke left. There's a reason why they seem to resemble the chaos gods so much. It's because they actually want destruction, degeneracy, and change for change's sake, as well as all of the pathologies of Nurgle. They're in favour of all of those things. Whereas the Christian nationalists are actually arguing for a more wholesome Christian civilization. And James's problem is that they have realized that the tools of woke are just laying on the table and that they can use them to attack liberalism itself. And he will just come out and tell you that that's what's happening. Woke right was never and is not an accusation against Christians or conservatives. Of course not. They're the ones he is trying to keep on the liberal plantation. The woke right is definitely seen and exposed, and the term will stick. Maybe. And it may well turn out that they'll adopt it for their own. Because maybe they actually like, well, the problem with the woke left wasn't the woke part, it was the left part. Because remember, the woke part is really just a systematic power analysis of how structures are kept in place in order to preserve the current hegemony and status quo of the ruling ideology. Well, that doesn't have to be partisan. That doesn't have to be a left or right issue. And in fact, in many cases, they actually are correct about a lot of these things that James Lindsay wants them to remain blind to, and themselves have fairly good critiques. Like, honestly, a lot of what the Frankfurt School are saying is right, even though they were communists. Even though I don't want to go in the direction they're heading in, they are making valid critiques. And this just comes down to Sun Tzu. You must know your enemy and know yourself, and if you do, you'll never lose a battle. James Lindsay wants to continually lose the battle against the left because he wants to refuse the widespread proliferation and understanding of what the left has discovered about our societies. Whereas the woke right are saying, well, no, look, we need to take that information, take that knowledge, and actually incorporate it into our own perspective. And so you get memes like this. Cast the ring of winning into the fire, and the woke right is no. And James Lindsay is on the position that we can never really defeat the left, because if we defeat the left, that means we have to defeat liberalism, and he is a liberal. So from any perspective in this conversation, he is the left. And that's why people point out that, look, he is definitely trying to purge the authentic right from the right, from the conservative movement. And he turns into a pink-haired gender goblin as soon as certain uncomfortable topics come up to which the liberal has no good answer, and in fact would require them to move off of liberalism entirely to be able to properly discuss. Yes, James Lindsay is the leftist in this conversation because liberalism is fundamentally a left-wing movement. And he is, in a way, using this mimetic framework in order to prey on the more ignorant pastors in the church. Yes, he is trying to make sure that the pastors and the Christians themselves remain in the liberal framework so he can make sure that liberalism survives. Because if the Christian right in America decide, you know what, we're not going to be liberals anymore because it seems to be a Luciferian creed that's intent on destroying everything God made, which I think it actually is, then why wouldn't he be acting as this agent of chaos against the right? He, of course, would. He's got every reason to do so. And Auron is right here, that he did intentionally manufacture a weapon of cancellation, the woke right label, that he ultimately hoped would be used by leftists and regime conservatives to attack the right. That's 100% correct, and that's exactly why he's created it. That is exactly why. And he just says, well, I just mourn everyone who stepped into the darkness of the woke right. Well, I mean, you can say that, but you're not saying that Auron is wrong, right? You are doing that. What you're trying to do is make sure that people like Matt Walsh and J.D. Vance or whoever are essentially ostracized from the right, and therefore the conservatives remain on the liberal plantation forever. However, I think this is a losing battle. I actually don't think that the conservative commitment to being liberals can actually sustain in the face of everything that's happening to our civilizations. And so you get people like Michael here who are like, look, the woke right aren't conservatives, and in a way that's true, but they are definitely right-wing. They are temporarily embarrassed progressive revolutionaries. They are just right-wing revolutionaries. They are not progressives in any way, shape, or form. You are the progressives. You are the ones who look at the established natural society of humankind and say, this is not acceptable because it has collective concepts contained within it. We want hardline individualism, and to get it, we are going to critique any power structure that is created by collective identity. And that's how liberalism won its wars. They are not progressives. You are the progressive. And it's really weird that you're sat there pretending not to be. You are not in any way traditionalists. You are absolute individualists who want atomized humanity. I mean, like, I don't even need to explain it, really. But it is you who are very much on the left of this conversation, and the woke right are very much on the right. They are just postmodern. They are living in the postmodern era. We are living with the consequences of what the postmodern left did in the 20th century. And they have decided, well, I think if this can be used to win, why can't we use it to win? And the liberals' only answer is, well, we won't have a liberal society at the end of that. And the woke right say, deal.